Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Reston. I'm pleased to see everyone here this morning. I am Reverend Barbara Coeyman. I am the grateful interim minister of this congregation. Welcome. Welcome into our house. Welcome into this place of worship. I know that we come from many locations, many cities, many places in the immediate and further places from Reston. We come from many congregations. Please know that for this hour, however, we are a community. We are united here in celebration of the life of Thomas Harkrader Pine. In this community, then, we can offer one another support. We can offer one another tears. We can offer one another our joys in remembering. Know that for this hour, you are here in a single community. And in this community, there is love and support. And so let us symbolize the creation of our community by the ringing of the chime.
Our chalice lighting this morning is by the Reverend Christine Robinson. In our time of grief, we light a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing life. In this time when we search for understanding and serenity in the face of loss, we light this sign of our quest for truth, for meaning, and community. And now the prelude.
Pay attention to the open sky. You never know gather this morning in the house of remembrance. Thomas Harkrader Pine, son, brother, friend, skateboarder, voracious learner, and so much more, has died. We gather in the shadow of death because the spirit of life demands to be heard. We meet with sorrow in our hearts, but with thankfulness also for the good things of life which we shared with Thomas. We meet to give form to our grief, to seek the comfort of one another's presence, and to make an important gesture of farewell. We come together with age-old questions in our minds, on our lips, and in our eyes. Why him? Why us? What now? And in our hearts, the deep wisdom, knowing without answers, that even in the shadow of death, the spirit of life will be heard, singing. Let this hour be love's hour, and these simple rites, love's confessional. For it is love's tribute that we come to offer today. Here, let the memory of Thomas become for us a sacred bond to all that he held dear, to the source of life in which he had his being, and to whose everlasting rhythm he is returned. I invite you now to join in song. The words are printed in your order of service. Nancy will play the tune one time through. You can remain seated. The first time we'll sing, "May I be filled with loving kindness." The second time, "May you be filled with loving kindness." And the third time, "May we be filled with loving kindness." Though we often try to deny or ignore it, the fact is that death comes to us all. Its primary meaning for those of us who live on is that death awakens us to the fact that our lives are far more precious and far more fragile than we ordinarily assume. Helen Keller recognized the universality of grief. She wrote, "We bereaved are not alone. We belong to the largest company in all the world, the company of those who have known suffering. When it seems that our sorrow is too great to be borne," she wrote, "let us think of the great family of the heavy-hearted into which our grief has given us entrance, and inevitably we will feel about us their arms, their sympathy, their understanding." We are here today in part to wrap those arms around one another and to hold one another. We are here to sympathize, and we are here to try to understand. Our faith does not diminish death by attempting to explain it away. Instead, we understand that grief is something to be lived through. It is something that, well lived, can become a gift. There are 3 things that all of us should know about grief at this time. The first is that there is no one right way to grieve. Each of us finds his or her own way. The work of grief is to honor what we've lost and to grow into the full awareness of our true inheritance. In time, we will come to a new sense of peace. But grief doesn't go away. This is the second thing to know. Grief isn't something people get over. Instead, time teaches us to weave each loss into the fabric of our lives. And as we do, we can become stronger, more compassionate, and more loving as a result of our loss. And finally, when we lose someone we love, it also brings back every other loss we've suffered. Our grief becomes compounded. So while each of us needs time to grieve alone, we also need to return to our communities of friends and family. We need to seek out one another as a source of strength and consolation, lest we become lost in our grief. Today, we gather to hold each other in our grief, to hold this family in the midst of their loss, and to be reminded that life is indeed a precious and fragile gift. As we do, it is appropriate also to set aside a few moments to reflect on the meaning of our larger humanity and the reality of death and sorrow, which one day comes to us all. Let us turn now to the wisdom of the poets and of the ages and take strength from their words of compassion and courage.
This first reading came to me immediately when I learned that I would be doing a reading for this service for Thomas. It struck me deeply when I first heard it years ago, and it seems sadly appropriate today. It is an ancient story about grief involving the great Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Marpa. Marpa lived on a farm with his family, and on the farm there were many monks who lived there and who came to study with this great teacher. One day, Marpa's oldest son was killed. Marpa was grief-stricken. Seeing this, one of the monks came to him and said, "I don't understand. You teach us that all is illusion. Yet you are crying. If all is an illusion, then why do you grieve so for your son?" Marpa replied, "Indeed, everything is an illusion. And the death of a child is the deepest illusion."
This reading comes from Kenneth Patton, long the poet of our Unitarian Universalist movement. It's called "To Possess Our Sorrows." None but the callous will make little the sorrow of men and women at the death of their beloved. there is no sure medicine for this ill, and those who love truly wish none. We know our sorrow is the necessary price of the joy of love and possession. The heavier our sorrow, the more has been that which is taken away. They who embrace and affirm life willingly invite sorrow as the risk taken in owning the fullness of life and companionship. We learn to possess our sorrows as the measure of our loves. We will learn in this parting to dwell more constantly with he who is gone, bringing him into ourselves as the companion of our silence and solitude, even as he was once our outward companion. The poignancy of these days in deepening us will draw us closer to he who is departed, not take him further away from us. The words we say here will bring no final comfort. The condolences of friends and relatives will not fully heal. Time will dull the pain, but even the medicine of time is not sure. The only final healing is to make peace within ourselves, create our peace by possessing our sorrows in our solitude, by possessing our memories and finding in them strength. Let us join our voices, again remaining seated in Winds Be Still, the words printed in your order of service.
very bright, and could tell a snappy, sarcastic joke that you could interpret 9,000 ways. He was the kind of friend most people want. He was empathetic, patient, and knew a lot of really cool stuff about a lot of very interesting subjects. He felt things so deeply. As a child and sometimes as an adult, he would get so excited about something, he would shake his hands and his body. He had been through emotional hell and back and lived to tell the tale, and was just starting to find his way when his life was cut short. Thomas Harkrader Pine was born to Carol Harkrader and her husband Fred in Minneapolis, Minnesota on April 4th in 1986. Carol had gone into labor 4 days earlier on April 1st, but Thomas was determined to make it in his own time. Carol and Fred had been trying to get pregnant, and they had a plan. Carol was working hard at Hennepin County Medical Center, and Fred was to be the house husband. But when reality came, that role didn't work out so well with Fred, who was very bright and also very charming. He was an affectionate father, but not very attentive to Thomas. Fred was struggling with his own addictions and let things slide financially to the point where they were almost evicted from the house that they owned. Carol had to kick Fred out, and soon she and Thomas moved back to Virginia to be with her parents. Thomas was about 1.5 years old. In Virginia, they were surrounded by family, and Thomas grew close to his grandmother and grandfather, especially his grandfather. In high school, writing about his grandfather, Thomas wrote that Carlton was the biggest male force in his life. Thomas remembered wrestling with his grandfather on the floor of the Great Falls home, drinking tea together over the daily crossword, afternoon rides to Toys R Us, and watching the evening news together after Thomas had taken his bath. Meanwhile, things were difficult for his mother, Carol. She was struggling with the expectations for living on her own and with the anxieties of considering returning to dating. She was working a lot, trying to make a living to support them, and she was lonely. When she tired of spending Sunday mornings watching cartoons and reading the paper, she decided to find a church that she could stand and that would give Thomas a religious education. In 1990, when Thomas was about 4 years old, they ended up here at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Reston. It was here that Carol met Mel Pine. They were introduced by a mutual friend at a new member orientation. Mel was coming off similar relationship difficulties as Carol, and Mel was missing having little kids around. They bonded well. Mel and Carol laugh when they remember an early date driving home from a movie. Thomas was in the back when he piped up, ever inquisitive, "Are you gonna sleep over?" At this point, Thomas was in kindergarten. Later, he would reflect on his fond memories of that year, sliding down the fireman's pole at recess, writing in his journal, and being starved for the day. On the surface, he seemed to be doing well. But there were times when he would get nervous about something and throw up. He sometimes cried in class. Mel remembers Thomas's general distrust around adults manifesting whenever they were driving somewhere, and Thomas would constantly say, "Are you going the right way? You're not going the right way." Hindsight being what it is, Thomas's parents see in this behavior the beginnings of a lifelong struggle for Thomas. Mel and Carol wed in May of 1992, when Thomas was 6 years old. On the day of the wedding, Thomas said to Mel, Well, I guess now I have to call you Dad. But the bonding between Mel and Thomas was not easy. Thomas had his life well ordered. While he wanted someone to call Dad, his grandfather had filled that role for as long as he could remember, and Mel's interpersonal style was very different. Mel liked to push Thomas. He wanted him to learn to think critically, and Mel would correct Thomas's behavior, something his grandparents didn't do very consistently. They would both keep trying to forge a strong relationship for years to come. It was in first or second grade when Thomas began to notice that he was different than the other kids. He was more sensitive, emotional, and prone to what he called temper tantrums. He would pick one child as a friend and then focus and obsess over that one person, whether or not the child returned the interest. One story in particular seems to capture Thomas at this time period. A neighbor boy, a bit older than Thomas, was Thomas's focus at that time. This boy had a birthday party but didn't invite Thomas. A rejected Thomas went outside and stood at a fire hydrant just around the bend from the birthday party, listening and waiting in vain to be invited in. 1994 was a tumultuous year for the Pine family with ups and downs. Carl, Thomas's little brother, was born. Thomas was excited to be a big brother and embraced the role. At the time, he described his brother as Carl Pine, who likes to eat. The family decided to move to Reston, so they moved to a new town and a new school. On top of these changes, Carlton, Thomas's beloved grandfather and number one nurturing male figure in his life, had a relapse of kidney cancer and quickly died. Looking back on the big move 9 years later, Thomas identified that this was when he first became depressed, crying over even trivial things. He also struggled with the culture change that moving to Reston in the third grade presented. The new kids were different than what he was used to, more concerned with clothing, and visible displays of wealth. But Thomas kept trying. In his third grade autobiography, he wrote that when he grew up, he wanted to be a Los Angeles County lifeguard, to save people and be by the beach every day. Or a marine biologist, because it would be fun to work with sea animals. So even as he struggled, we can see his empathy for other people and even animals was present. This pattern, too, would continue into adulthood. The next few years would be exceedingly difficult for the family. Mel lost his job, and Carol was working hard to provide for them. Carol's mother suffered from a worsening Alzheimer's and eventually required assisted living. The stress mounted. Thomas tried to rebel against the clothing-obsessed kids in his school and became obsessed himself with nonconformity. He was the only kid in his elementary school who dressed like a rapper with big baggy jean co pants. He kept struggling to find his place. His parents made sure he was in therapy, but psychiatrists would hesitate to make a diagnosis on such a young child, so he didn't receive any medication. Thankfully, middle school offered a reprieve for Thomas. His parents were afraid to send him to the local public middle school, and so they enrolled him in Flint Hill, a private school for kids who exhibit high standards of character and the potential for achieving success in a demanding academic program. It was a school where different learning styles were embraced, and Thomas got the personal attention he needed. The school's stress on the mastery of critical thinking and problem solving and writing skills fit Thomas's abilities and interests. Thomas was very, very bright, and he processed very quickly. In public school, he would often have figured out an answer before the teacher had even finished explaining it, but at Flint Hill, his natural intelligence was more engaged. He made some friends, was in plays, got invited to parties, and even went to camp with a friend. He found a measure of acceptance in middle school on the basis of being smart, even competing in Latin trivia. It was in middle school that he first played lacrosse. As Thomas was entering 9th grade, the family moved to Percival. They could no longer afford private school tuition, and with Carl entering kindergarten, it seemed like a good time to find a place where the public schools would work well for both children. The move was good for the family. It improved both Mel's and Carol's mental health. Thomas became active in academics and on the yearbook editorial staff. He played lacrosse as a freshman and then as a senior on the high school team that won the district tournament. Academically, he did fine, but there continued to be concerns about his mood. He saw a therapist regularly. In his senior year autobiography, he wrote in a poem, "We were racked by the plague, depression, mania, alcoholism, our old friend. Forget well-rounded, put-together young men. I'm barely clinging to sanity." But cling to sanity he did, tenaciously. And he graduated from Loudoun Valley High School and was on his way to the University of Virginia. Thomas had screamed with joy when he had been admitted early admission to UVA, Mr. Jefferson's University, the night before Thanksgiving. Thomas loved the state of Virginia, the outline of which he had tattooed on his hip. That's love. He loved UVA, and he loved Charlottesville. At the time he was attending UVA, there were a lot of students who were coming in from out of state. There was a trend of getting t-shirts made up with, "I'm from California," or "I'm from Wyoming." In true Thomas fashion, he had a shirt made up that proudly declared, "F you all, y'all, F y'all, I'm from Virginia." Only, I think it probably was spelled out. Thomas picked a major that he thought was cool and would be profitable, international political science, and he threw himself into it. He intimidated people with how smart he was, but not Joe. The first time they met, they weren't even sure that they would like each other. They were very similar and were soon engaged in a game of one-upsmanship. Joe remembers that there was no subject Thomas wasn't well versed in, and if there was something, Thomas would obsess over it until he was an expert. But these intelligent, intense young men hit it off and soon formed a friendship that would last almost a decade. It was with Joe and a few of their other friends that Thomas picked up skateboarding. A group of them all bought longboards at the same time and would ride together. Skitching behind a bus was a convenient and quick way to get from one class to another, and Thomas loved to go fast, particularly through the Bel Air neighborhood where the people were friendly and the cars were courteous. Skateboarding was both an activity he enjoyed as well as a means of getting from point A to point B. And it was particularly useful as a means of travel after Thomas had been drinking. Thomas was not all work and no play. During his freshman year, his parents had gotten a call that Thomas had been arrested for smoking pot in the dorm room. After a period of monitoring, he was not convicted. But Thomas had been shaken by the experience, and his parents noticed an increase in his drinking after that. They still had access to his bank account, and at that time, and they watched his balance drop quickly as he went out to eat frequently and was buying drinks for people. Thomas desperately wanted to connect with people, but his social anxiety made it very difficult. He tried connecting with fraternities, but he would alienate people with his desire to always be right. And those that were interested in him fell prey to the old Groucho Marx quote, "I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member." Drinking greased the wheels and became a way for him to self-medicate his social anxiety and had the added benefit of being a way to be perceived as cool in the UVA culture. Thomas got his propensity toward alcoholism from both sides of the family. Carlton, his beloved maternal grandfather, had been a high-functioning alcoholic. And his biological father, Fred, had been found dead in the car in which he was living just before Carl Carol and Mel had gotten married. Thomas's tolerance for alcohol increased rapidly, and he was able to drink a lot before people would notice. He had the financial resources to buy drinks for people, which made him popular, and he was a loving drunk, giving people hugs and forehead kisses. Sometime during his years at UVA, he came home and went to a family therapy session with his parents. Thomas shared that he had drunk to the point of blacking out several times. The therapist wisely asked Thomas to describe a typical night of drinking. Mel and Carol cringed as they heard how many bars and drinks a typical night might entail. Eventually, the drinking started causing problems at school. He began missing classes, which would then cause him to have a panic attack, which he would then self-medicate with alcohol. After missing too many classes, he would feel too far behind and quit going. It got to the point where by the beginning of his senior year, he was having so many panic attacks he could no longer drive. He was suspended from school and got so stressed out that even Joe stopped hearing from him. He explained his situation to UVA and they let him withdraw. After the suspension was over, Thomas re-enrolled at UVA, changed his major to English, and then graduated in 2009. For his graduation, the family celebrated by going to the inn at Little Washington. After graduation, Thomas moved back home to Purcellville. He picked up a habit he had started while he was home during the suspension from UVA. He would sit in the basement, watch TV, and drink beer. And it was during this time, both before and after graduation, that the brothers finally bonded. Thomas had been a pretty typical big brother for most of Carl's life, tormenting him in a way that Carl said would prepare him for high school. But now the brothers were on more equal footing. Carl was in high school, and the brothers would sit down in the basement watching hockey together. They shared a lot together during this time. Meanwhile, Thomas started working for Mel at the Allstate insurance agency that Mel owned. But selling things was not a good fit for Thomas, and Mel thought he would do better in claims. Allstate wouldn't interview him, so Mel got Thomas an interview with State Farm. Thomas was thrilled not only to be hired, but because the new job meant he was returning to his beloved Charlottesville. Thomas established a life for himself back in Charlottesville. He loved having friends over and cooking for them. He and Joe would get into esoteric conversations about things like the role of the 40-pound Twinkie in the Ghostbusters saga. He was banned from playing certain trivia games because he was simply too good at them. He even embraced an ironic redneck phase, getting a truck and putting a bumper sticker on it that said, "I still miss my ex, but my aim is improving." Much to his mother's chagrin. Of course, the bumper sticker was a joke. Thomas had had a few long-term relationships by this point, but they had all ended very positively with no hard feelings. Many girls liked him. He was sweet and caring and went out of his way to make women feel special. But he had an enormous lack of self-confidence. He was a perfectionist, and when he turned his critical eye on himself, he always found himself lacking, no matter what other people said to bolster his self-esteem. Thomas had a deep sense of shame at every mistake that he made. Thomas did well while working at State Farm. He got raises and then a promotion. But the new job wasn't a good match for Thomas's perfectionism and his sense of fairness. He was exposed to situations that he was not able to let go of emotionally and leave at work. And so another round of panic attacks began. But Thomas was also very brave. He went to State Farm and explained to them what was going on. They gave him a month of sick leave. And when he returned, they changed his job assignment. During that month, Joe was afraid that one day he would come home and find Thomas had killed himself. When Joe talked to Thomas about this, Thomas said, "Joe, I would never do that." And Joe believed him. The last few months, Thomas was the #1 guy in his section. State Farm sent a productivity specialist to sit with him and see how he was able to do so much. And Thomas wasn't even maxing himself out. Thomas was in therapy, and they had finally found a combination of medications he could tolerate. He was working on his calligraphy and writing in his journal. For his birthday this year, Thomas and Carol drove up to New York, had dinner, saw a play, and came back the next day. They had a lot of time to talk and to connect. He told her he liked his new therapist and things were going well. Though Mel and Thomas had never really bonded as well as they had hoped, they were both learning how to appreciate one another. Thomas wanted to be an analyst. He thought it would suit his skills better, so he was applying for positions in Atlanta and Dallas. He continued working as a bartender, though. It allowed him to be in an environment that he loved so much. The morning before his death, Thomas went out to brunch with a friend. They hung out all day and had a number of drinks. He came home for a brief nap and then went back out to one of his favorite watering holes. He left to head for home at around 1:30, but never made it. He died skateboarding home on a steep hill on which he had fallen last summer. The road was wet and he was very drunk. He was not wearing a helmet, it was dark, and the surface was uneven. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Though his drinking certainly influenced his death, friends attest that unlike his biological father's death, in the minutes before Thomas's death, he was happy and surrounded by people who cared deeply about him. Thomas was a sensitive, empathetic person who cared deeply about others, though he never found himself worthy. With his hypersensitivity came an appreciation for beauty in all its manifestations. He tried to truly experience life and be present in the moment. Since his death, his family has received notes and emails about what a bright, creative, and kind person he was. Perhaps, if he had understood how other people saw him, life would have been a bit easier for him. What makes his death all the harder is the belief that Thomas was just getting his life together. His loved ones had hoped to watch him continue to find his way as he stumbled towards maturity and towards a life he could finally live. We mourn the loss of what could have been, the man he could have grown into. But it is not his death for which we will remember Thomas. Instead, we will remember his sense of humor, his intellect, his voracious desire to learn, his willingness to do anything for you if he cared about you. We will remember his patience, his desire to help others, and how he cared so deeply. The best tribute we can pay Thomas now is to embrace these qualities and values in our own lives. In this way, his memory will live on in the love that he shared. In this way, he will be a presence forever in the hearts of all who knew him. I invite you now to all rise in body or in spirit as we join together singing Wo Ya Ya. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, When a beloved person dies, his friends gather together for many reasons. At such a time, the various faiths which sustain us separately come together in harmony, which acts across all creeds and assures us of the permanence of goodness, the inspiration of friendship, and the value of a serviceable life. It is good for us to speak of those qualities which we treasured in Thomas, for by speaking of them, they become somehow vital and enduring and grow into us, so that we take on what was noble and become more noble ourselves. And so I invite those of you who would care to do so to come forward to a microphone over here and briefly share a memory of Thomas.
My name is Julian, and it is an honor to be speaking on behalf of Thomas. I had an enduring and very personal and meaningful and particular friendship with him. Since hearing about Thomas, the only thing I wanted to do was to talk about him on his behalf. Not because many people didn't have things to say, but because no one, although I think you did such an amazing job, that was such a panoramic view of him, I don't think anyone can really do justice to what a dynamic and remarkable and memorable and once-in-a-lifetime personality this guy was. He had the most robust intellect. The night I met him, and you don't remember the night you meet most people, and certainly not for me. I was silly at university. I was his partner in crime at points, but also there was such depth to him. And the night I met him, I just thought, who is this guy? Because Thomas he spoke to the Virginia gentleman, the intellect, but he was also a unique, standout, alternative, charismatic, so smart. I mean, he was an amazing person. And he just made such an impression on me. And I'll tell you the kind of impression he made. You go to university with people, and you're friends, and you drink with them, and you party, and you share activities. But Thomas was the rare kind of person, and these are the great relationships in life, where he could have been a brain in a mason jar, and I still would have had the same relationship. Because he was so interesting. After we graduated, we kept a correspondence up, but we wrote to each other regularly. Pages, and I loved his emails. I'd open them, I'd read part of them, and I go, I can't read it right now, because I just enjoyed it so much, because he was so interesting. I mean, you never said anything to Thomas. He's like 1 in 10 times he'd go ahead, no, I don't know this, go ahead, keep going. And he kind of like tell me to carry on with this like gesture, this rigid geometry about his arms. But most of the time, I mean, he knew everything and then more what I was bringing up. And in that sense, I found his friendship two things. It first humbled me, because at UVA, you go there, you feel smart, and a lot of that's affirmed. But Thomas was the first person where I had to say, Julian, you're just not the smartest person. Because, and it made me think, and it was humbling, but it was also such a flattering friendship, because I thought, why is this guy friends with me? You know, I want to say to Thomas's credit, he had an aptitude for partying, but I partied with Thomas in my youth, and I would say he had a remarkable intelligence and a composure nearly always. And I really want that to be said for him. He was a remarkable intellect. And even at the height of his craziness or silliness, in which I was there, in the worst way, he was always composed and extraordinary and had this radiant energy, and he was, remember this, he was in but not of. He was at the fraternity scene, he joined the Jefferson Society, he quits right before full membership, not because he couldn't do it, just because I think he just wanted to say, well, I could do it, and I'm done. And that was Thomas. I just want to say he taught me that intelligence isn't what we look at, it's how we look at it. He had the ability to look at something like watery beer or dumb street art or weird films or odd music and just find value. And I just cannot tell you how rare that is. He could just find value in things to say and value in so much in life. The word because, that's my tribute to Thomas. That's the word that you need to see and remember Thomas with, because. Most of us, when we say the word because, we don't really justify. We go, because. Thomas had two things. He had intelligence in this sense. He had remarkable factual recall, has been noted, and the ability to synthesize information. That's intelligence. And if Thomas said because, you listened. Because it was always edifying. It was always worthwhile. It was always informative. I was never bored in your son's company. I was never bored. Not once. Ever. Ever. He was my number one pick all time for a dinner companion, full stop, ever. He was amazing. What a robust intellect he had. I can't emphasize that enough. He was a beautiful writer, a great storyteller, an amazing musician, listened widely to everything. You could bring up anything. You could say, have you seen this weird Japanese blah, blah, blah? Involves some weird thing in a film, and like, it's just something really weird. And he'd go, yeah, I read about that. Yeah, no, it's hard to find, but I think I ordered a copy. Like, he was just into life. I want to say on his behalf, I never met you as his family, and so I was reflecting, well, what was Thomas's family like? And I was just reflecting for myself. And I concluded that having only known you as you were refracted through your son, and never having met you, I felt I could say 3 things on his behalf. He was grateful for you and he loved you. He was so grateful to have you as his father. He had gratitude in his heart, and I felt that. And I knew him in a candid way. You could never look at Thomas's heart directly. You had to not acknowledge that he was showing it to you. And I learned that about him, and he was grateful for you. Your power and strength and intelligence just radiated through that boy. And I always felt his like relationship with you in him. I just felt it. He was so proud of you, and he adored you. He adored you. He had such a tenderness for you. He was so proud of you. I won't run on about this, but I hope the way I've spoken for Thomas attests to the passion he put in me. Because he was a lot like a train that goes through many towns, sometimes during the day and other times at night. In many people's lives, you hear the train and you see it. But for all of us, he just passes through. Because Thomas was a tourist, a social tourist, a robust, versatile person, endlessly developing, evolving, going in many directions. And the people who would remember Thomas Pine at the mention of the name could not fill Scott Stadium. Believe me, he was a remarkable person. The word because. The great shame here is he will never be able to answer to the question of existence, why are you here? Because. But even if he'd lived forever, he couldn't have done justice to the potential he had. I love Thomas Pine. He loved the middle name Harkrader. He was an amazing human being. Always remember him, because. Thomas Pine.
Real quick, the only thing that I would add to what Dawn said is that he was a lot of fun.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Joe Daniel. I'd known Thomas for a very, very long time, near a decade. And I'm going to move this. You know what? We're going to go this way. And thank you, Julian, for doing such an excellent job wherever you're at. That you nailed it, man. You nailed it. Thomas was what I would describe as a connoisseur of life in all its facets. And he had a unique ability to find unique beauty in things. We would often talk about, Dawn said esoteric things, but something that we really did share was this sense of wabi-sabi, and that's a Japanese term, kind of meaning beauty and imperfection. And he was a master of finding that in any and everything, whether it was some bizarre, like avant-garde jazz quartet doing a visual performance, or, watching old Kurosawa films and dissecting them and then comparing them to the Star Wars movies. Like, he was just absolutely a connoisseur for life. And if he was a movie director, he'd be an auteur, because he would, painstakingly make sure every detail of that film was reflective, meaningful, and full of symbolic value. Thomas was probably the most compassionate, creative, empathetic, patient, and hilarious person I ever knew. We were kind of like the odd couple. He would kind of calm me down. I'm very quick to write people off or get angry, but he always put me in check and kind of imposed his empathy on me so that I could be a better person. Amber can attest to this. Thomas also bought me more drinks than anybody in my life. And to be quite honest, I think he bought Amber more drinks than I ever bought her. So that kind of speaks to his just giving disposition. And, there was a period of time at a very historic bar in Charlottesville, Virginia, where he was so proud he got this T-shirt that said Virginian Elite. And I think that they gave him that T-shirt because he had probably spent a lot of that money you guys put away for him at the Virginian, buying people drinks and just having a great time. And really kind of, I would say he's kind of legendary on the corner, to be quite honest. And he'd kind of scoff at that, but whatever. But I wanted to share something with everybody that I found really meaningful. Last summer, I lost my grandfather, And during that time, I was struggling a bit, and Thomas wasn't really around much. I thought maybe he was trying to like avoid me or something, but I remember coming home one morning, and there was a note on our kitchen table, and he wrote to me, "Yusuf, I've always been terrible at expressing my emotions when they need to be expressed honestly, and that's why I kept myself out tonight, only coming home when I knew you all would be asleep. I don't know about your relationship with your grandfather, but I knew mine ran deep. Such a loss is hard to fathom, but despite the preparations that we believe we've made, I hope that you seek solace in the reality of objective truths that we experience every day. Sunrises, your beautiful girlfriend, the purity of an open mind, the yearning of our dreams, great and small. I don't know if this will be helpful to you in the slightest, but I hope that you will recognize the caring behind this sentiment and take it for what it is. You shall endure, as we all must do, and in your perseverance find strength. You are loved by him and many others around you. As the back of this paper says, all things occur by the will of the universe. It is arrogant to question these motives." And it's funny because this sentiment is echoed in a very meaningful Dalai Lama quote that I try to keep close in my heart and in my mind, especially, when going through the river of life and the waters are choppy. And that quote is, "Find hope in the darkest of days and focus on the brightest. I do not judge the universe." And I just think it really speaks to Thomas's level of integrity, compassion, wisdom, that I'm not sure if he was cognizant of this Dalai Lama quote, but he very, very accurately captured the sentiment and gave that to me in a time of need. And, like Julian said, he was just an incredible individual and like a train, touched so many lives. And you go to Charlottesville, you mentioned the name T-Pine, and a lot of people will smile and laugh and share a happy memory. Just because he really did touch so many lives, and he's very loved. And to close, I'd just like to say that, our memories, our positive, happy memories and love really conquer death. And the more we can hold people in our hearts and remember them and hold that love and carry it with us, they will never die. So thank you, guys.
I don't have anything really composed. I hadn't really planned on speaking, but I just thought I would say a few things about Thomas. I'm Amber, Joe's girlfriend, and I kind of lived with them for around 2 years. I knew Thomas for around 2 years, and the things that I remember from Thomas is I just felt like Thomas was just like the force of life. Like, he was just so full of life and joy when you were around him, and whenever we were hanging out with him, I'd be like, where is he going? Can we go with him? Can we go stay with him? And he would help me kind of join my team and get Joe to go do some fun things that he wouldn't always be so excited to do, but I think he would end up thankful because we would all have such a good time. And I just remember times of coming home late in the evening, and I really just wanted to play Just Dance, which is this funny video game that you play where you just kind of dance along with what's on the screen. And Thomas was always willing to play with me, and I really, really appreciated that. I had a lot of fun. But beyond just being such an amazing force of life and joy, he was also incredibly empathetic, like people have said. Just yesterday, I was reading a piece that he wrote after a few months ago, or I guess not that long ago, I don't know if you all have heard about what happened to Martise Johnson, but there's been a lot of, I guess, racial tension in Charlottesville over some things that have happened, and he wrote a piece about that, and it was just very, it was very touching, and you can tell that he really put a lot of thought into everything that on around him, and he really cared about what was going on around him and really wanted to make a difference and engage the world and experience life. So that's what I have to say about Thomas.
Thank you for sharing your precious memories. I now invite Mel Pine, Thomas's father, to share a few words.
In a minute, I'm going to read a poem that Thomas wrote when he was still in high school. We think he was probably a junior or a senior in high school when he was, a poem he wrote when he was just 17 or so. But before I do, I just want to do some very brief thank yous. Very brief, so I won't name a lot of people, but we really want all of you to know that we have felt the love, and we continue to feel the love. Whether it has been in hugs, ink and paper, or pixels, or simply your thoughts and prayers alone, we have felt them, everyone, and we thank you for them. I do want to single out a few people, one of whom is not here today, but she's Lauren Chela Harkrader Rosas, for finding that picture that's on the Order of Service, the cover of the Order of Service, which was actually way off in the corner of a picture of her parents dancing at her wedding. But she spotted this off in the corner, and that picture is a treasure for us. I want to thank, of course, the musicians who put together a wonderful thing in short notice. I want to thank Barbara Elvin and the Loudon Caring Committee, Linda Johnson, Dora Anderson, two old friends of ours in the Reston Caring Circle, the ministers, the Reverends Eric Wickstrom in Charlottesville, who did the service for us there, Barbara Coeyman here in Reston, our ministers, Phyllis, Hubbell, and John Manwell, and especially Dawn Cooley, whom we called the day Thomas died, and asked her to come in from her congregation in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, when Dawn's biography is written, I expect to be a footnote. You see, I believe that I am the reason she went into the ministry.
Okay.
She came here, she joined this church, she and her husband John joined this church around 20 years ago or so, and they looked around and they saw me and they say, that guy needs more help than the Unitarian Universalist ministry currently has, and they need reinforcements. Or maybe what she said was, that guy and his lovely bride and their new baby might need me in 20 years, and I want to be there for them. So I want to, just as I bow to the Buddha to represent all the Buddhas of all time and the Buddha that's within all of us, I'm going to bow to Dawn to represent all of the ministers, all of the people who've answered the call to give their lives to ministry, and the capacity of each and every one of us to minister to each other. So 7 a.m., the doorbell rings, the deputies come in. I've told some of you the story. Monday, June 1st, I got the news and I turned to go up the stairs to tell Carol. I asked the deputies to stay there. I froze for about 30 seconds just to absorb the enormity of what was happening to us and what I had to tell her. And I went up the stairs and I opened the door and she was awake, she was dressed, she was about to come down. And I told her to sit down and I put her in an easy chair we have over there. I learned later, she told me later, that when I walked in, I was so white and sweaty that she was certain I was having a heart attack. And the bad news was that I was having a heart attack, and it didn't make any sense that I was making her sit down if I was having a heart attack. But she sat in the chair, and that chair is next to a wall of family photographs we keep up in our bedroom. And in addition to the wall, there's one other thing. There's a card that Thomas made, and it's back on the table back there, for a Mother's Day, probably around 2003. And it's got a quote from Washington Irving, and then this poem that Thomas wrote. The growth of a child is clumsy, like the path of a toddler's tricycle. Not much forward momentum, occasionally backward, but always under the vigilant eye of the mother, protecting her young. The child becomes bigger, their wheels become two, but the bike still lurches. In comes the mother, with guiding eye on the future and a guiding hand on the seat. Finally, the bicycle becomes an automobile, and mother's help is less seen, less heard, but still felt. Mother's love will never leave us, so never will we truly leave her. Love, Thomas.
None of us, even together, can sum up the life of another, especially one as unique as Thomas. Life is too precious to be relegated to mere words. Rather, it must remain as it is remembered by those who loved and watched and shared. Such memories are alive and unbounded by events of birth or death. And in those living memories of love, we possess the greatest gift one person can give to another. Whatever remains of Thomas's spirit is at peace and beyond all harm. As he was good, that goodness will be his guardian always. As he was loved, that love will attend him forevermore. Now the work is left to us, the living, to carry forth the beauty and joy of that life which has now passed. Where we would weep, perhaps he would have us laugh. Where we mourn, perhaps he would have us rejoice. But we know that he would forgive us our grief. For to grieve is to love, and to love is to give praise and thanksgiving for the life which has blessed us all. To that life we pray courage and strength, that our frailty be forgiven, that our sorrows be redeemed, and that the wounds of our loss be healed. If so much that is precious can be so easily lost, let us more dearly cherish all that remains. Whatever we have known and loved becomes a part of us and is ours forever. May it be so. Blessed be.
And so, my friends, our service of remembering is over. On behalf of this congregation, we are honored that you have chosen to come here for this time of being together, for this time of celebrating this amazing life.